Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with another Game of Thrones prediction video. In this video, I'm going to break down episode by episode on what happens to Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones Season 7. But without further ado, let's get right into it. In episode 1, we're going to see Daenerys finally arrive at Dragonstone. And we're going to see her pull up to the shores with Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, Varys, Theon, Yara, and the Sand Snakes, Ellaria, Tyene, Nymeria, and Obara Sand. We're going to see that her dragons really embrace the big open landscape. And we're going to see Daenerys climb up the stairs and claim back her home castle. We're going to see her tear down Stannis' banners, really representing that she is now taking over control. And we're going to see her go into the old war room and see the table map of Westeros. And she turns to Tyrion and says, "Shall we begin?" It is in this war room where Tyrion and Daenerys have a discussion on what to do next. And they're going to come to the conclusion that they cannot just attack King's Landing. They need to rally all of the lords on their side. So Daenerys is going to send out ravens to all of the lords of Westeros, having them come to Dragonstone to swear fealty to her. In episode 2, we're going to see Daenerys have a big conference with all of her allies in the war room to really discuss their plan of attack. And this conference is going to consist of Tyrion, Varys, Grey Worm, Missandei, Ellaria, Yara, and Theon Greyjoy. And it's going to start by Daenerys asking Varys if he's heard any whispers. And Varys will continue on and say that he's heard whispers of an attack on Highgarden and Dorne. And the Lannisters have actually secured these locations for themselves. And obviously Ellaria will be furious and want to take back her homeland. And then Varys continues on and says that he's heard that the new king of the Iron Islands, Euron Greyjoy, has sided with Cersei Lannister. And after hearing this news, Daenerys is pretty surprised that Cersei's coming at them full force. Daenerys thought that Cersei would be more reserved, but Tyrion tells her that he didn't expect any less from his sister. And Tyrion reminds Daenerys that they need to rally all of Westeros together before taking the throne. And Tyrion suggests in order to do that, that they sail south from Dragonstone to take over Dorne and Highgarden back. And Tyrion goes on to say that he is confident that Cersei will not surrender. And that rallying all of Westeros together in unification is the way to defeat Cersei. And then Grey Worm asks how they will attack. And Daenerys tells Grey Worm that they will take back the lands that they lost, and she promises Ellaria that they will get their lands back. And Daenerys hopes that Olenna Tyrell is safe with the Lannister forces. Tyrion agrees with Daenerys, but he says that Casterly Rock is ripe for attack, because he knows that it's not as populated as usual. The bulk of the Lannister forces aren't even in Casterly Rock. There are soldiers in Dorne, in King's Landing, and the bulk of the forces in Highgarden. And they're shipping resources from Highgarden back to King's Landing to help with the war effort. So Daenerys asks Tyrion what he suggests, and Tyrion lays out a plan on how to defeat Cersei. So Tyrion suggests that they should send out 3 separate groups for attack. And all of these 3 groups must go south along Westeros to the coast of Dorne, and then they should sail west to Highgarden, and then to Casterly Rock. The first party consists of Theon, Yara, Ellaria, and the Sand Snakes, and they will sail tomorrow. And they're going to be clearing out a path of the sea to Dorne, and their job is to secure it from the Lannister invaders. Tyrion wants the Greyjoys to sail first because they're great at sea, and they can cut through all potential threats for the other groups following them. And the Sand Snakes are going because they know Dorne more than anyone, and it is hugely beneficial that their task is to secure their own home. And then the second party will set sail after, and that consists of Grey Worm and the Unsullied. And they will leave a couple of days after. And their job is to sail in the wake of the previous party, but instead of sailing for Dorne, sail around and go straight for Casterly Rock for a strategic attack. And Daenerys is wondering why they would attack Casterly Rock first, but Tyrion believes that Casterly Rock is ripe for the taking. And that the Lannisters expect them to take Highgarden first because it's the closest to Dragonstone. But Tyrion believes that Casterly Rock is really easy to take, and then they can flank from the north to attack Casterly Rock. So then Grey Worm asks if they should siege Casterly Rock, and Tyrion says that it won't be necessary because he knows of all the secret tunnels because he handled all of the shit in Casterly Rock and he knows the plumbing system very well. Tyrion tells Grey Worm that it's a stealth mission, he's going to have to sneak into Casterly Rock and then let in the bulk of the force through the front door. And Daenerys says that while he's taking Casterly Rock, she will stay here in Dragonstone to treaty with all of the lords of Westeros. And she believes that since the bulk of the force is in Highgarden, she may need to bring a dragon to that fight to help out. And then Tyrion says that that leaves the third party, and that involves Quono and the Dothraki. Tyrion tells Grey Worm to send a raven the moment they're about to take Casterly Rock, and at that moment they're going to send the Dothraki south to Highgarden. And the Dothraki are going to sail south and attack Highgarden from the south. Tyrion says that the Dothraki would be best suited fighting in Highgarden because of the open and sprawling fields. And Daenerys picks a meeting point just south of Highgarden to meet up before the war starts. And this attack sets it up in the way where you have the Unsullied coming from the north, and you have the Dothraki coming from the south, and you have the Lannister forces stuck in the middle. And Tyrion believes that with a coordinated effort, the Lannister forces could be defeated in moments, because they really have nowhere to run. So after this meeting, Tyrion stays behind with Grey Worm to discuss Casterly Rock and a plan of attack. And he tells him all of his secrets that he knows about the castle. And then Theon, Yara, Ellaria, and the Sand Snakes prepare to leave for Dorne. After this scene, we're going to see Daenerys walk the beaches. She's going to go into the crypts, or the tunnels under Dragonstone. And it's going to show that it's full of dragon bones and full of tunnels of dragon glass. And while she's really crawling through here, discovering her family history, by the time she gets out, she sees Theon, Yara, Ellaria, and the Sand Snakes leave for Dorne. But little does she know that this ship is going to get attacked by Euron Greyjoy later in the night. And then in the last scene of the episode, Melisandre arrives at Dragonstone, and she knocks on the door and she comes in. And Daenerys is wondering who she is and where she's from, and Melisandre tells her story, how she was from the north and she knew Jon Snow. She resurrected him, brought him back to life, and she tells her that she supported Stannis Baratheon in her visions in the flame for the future. And Daenerys here is very skeptical, but Daenerys decides to keep Melisandre because she believes that she could be somewhat useful in the future. In episode 3, Daenerys and Tyrion are going to get an update from Varys on all of her forces. Varys is going to tell her that he received a raven from Grey Worm and that they're approaching Casterly Rock for attack. He actually left the episode before. And Daenerys tells Varys that the Dothraki should leave tomorrow with Quono, and that they should ride straight for Highgarden. And Tyrion mentions that they will have Casterly Rock within a day, and that most of the Lannister forces have stormed Highgarden and hold King's Landing. But then Daenerys asks about Theon, Yara, and the Sand Snake's ship that was heading south for Dorne, and Varys says that he hasn't heard anything. But it is in the next scene where we see Jon and Davos arrive at Dragonstone. Daenerys is sitting in her throne room, and Tyrion and Missandei bring them up the stairs to meet Daenerys. And along the walk to Daenerys' throne room, Jon notices Melisandre, and then by the time he gets into the throne room, he sees Daenerys standing there with Varys. Davos and Jon introduce themselves, and then Daenerys goes on to tell them of her mission to reunite all of the Seven Kingdoms, and introduce a better world, and how she wants to create a better world and leave the world better than they found it. And it is here where she asks Jon to swear fealty to her, to try and build this better world, to reunite the North and the South. And it is here where Jon refuses. He said that he's followed people his whole life, and he said that in his experience, most of the time they don't know what's best for people. He says that their pursuit of power clouds their judgment, and he questions if they really want the best for the many because they are so consumed with their own aspirations. But then he continues and says that he came to tell her of a real threat. And he said that it's not about a war for power, but it's a war for survival, and that a threat is looming that can eliminate all of humankind. But then he mentions the White Walkers, and he says that the long night is coming. And Daenerys immediately dismisses him, but then Davos makes a speech and talks about Jon and how he fought over the wall and he defeated a White Walker. And how this world is much stranger than anyone seems because he said that he witnessed Jon's resurrection, and Jon immediately dismisses it, but Daenerys still catches on. And Davos goes on to say that it doesn't matter whose skeleton sits on the Iron Throne, and that it is time to fight for survival. And it is at this moment where Tyrion vouches for Jon because he isn't crazy. But Daenerys in a way kind of respects and believes in Jon because of the conversation she had with Melisandre earlier. It is in this conversation where they are pretty much proving everything Melisandre was saying. And then Melisandre speaks up and says that she's seen a giant fight at the wall in the flames. And she says that Daenerys and Jon are both integral in that fight. And Davos is obviously very bitter towards Melisandre and says that to Daenerys, but Daenerys says that no harm will come to Melisandre because she is under her protection, and she is not in the north any longer. So Daenerys ends up telling Jon that he can stay, even though he didn't swear fealty. She says that they can work together to stop this threat, and that they can talk through all the formalities later. And it is at this moment where Daenerys starts to really consider the threat of the White Walkers. We will then get our first character development scene between Jon and Daenerys, and they're going to be walking beneath the crypts of Dragonstone. And it is here where Jon is going to talk about Winterfell and tell her about his crypts and how his family is buried there. And Daenerys is going to show him all of the dragonglass that they have in these crypts. And Daenerys tells Jon that she's going to get people down here to start mining it for him. But then on their way up, they realize that Theon and the Ironborn are coming back to Dragonstone. And Theon looks extremely upset, but Jon calls him over to talk to him. And it is here where we see Jon yell at Theon for betraying his family, killing Robb, and dispersing the entire family. And he's going to scare the living shit out of Theon, and he's going to say that he's going to spare his life only because he saved Sansa. And then Theon goes on to tell Daenerys that they were attacked by Euron Greyjoy on the coast of Dorne. that Yara Greyjoy, Alaria, and Tyene were captured and the rest are all dead. And Theon is noticeably emotional, and Daenerys pulls him aside and says that he must be the one in charge of the Ironborn. She tells him that he's extremely capable, and she promises Theon that they will get his sister back. But when they get back to the top of Dragonstone, Varys tells Daenerys that her army is encroaching on the Lannisters holding Highgarden. He says that the Unsullied are appropriately stationed in the north, and that the Dothraki are appropriately stationed in the south, and they're ready for attack. He says that the Lannisters are shipping goods and assets out of the castle and bringing them to King's Landing. And then Varys also tells her that he hears whispers that the bulk of the Lannister force is at Highgarden, and that he advises that she go help out her soldiers. So Daenerys decides to hop on Drogon and go help out her army, and Jon wishes her luck. So then in episode 4, we're going to see Daenerys arrive at the south side of Highgarden with her Dothraki. Daenerys will receive a raven from Grey Worm telling her that they are ready to attack tomorrow at noon. She tells Quono to rally the Dothraki horde and prepare for attack tomorrow at noon. And she tells them to attack all the Lannister men, and she tells them about all of the resources that they're going to be shipping. And she tells Quono to keep her Dothraki away from the carriages because Daenerys is going to torch them with Drogon. But then in the next scene, we get to the battle. We see Grey Worm lined up with his Unsullied, which is north of Highgarden, and we see the Dothraki and Drogon moving fast from the south. And the Lannisters are stuck in the middle to fend off the road that is shipping the carriages to King's Landing. Grey Worm sees the Dothraki and Drogon approaching, and he hears Drogon's roar, and then the Unsullied start marching towards the Lannister forces. Then we get a look at the Lannister lineup, and we see Tarly forces and Lannister forces fighting together. They have forces lined up on the south side and the north side, both with a field of archers and men with shields guarding their backs. We're going to see Bronn and Jaime riding back and forth between the north and the south to prepare for the incoming forces. But then the fight happens. Jaime commands them to shoot arrows at all the incoming soldiers from the south and from the north. The Unsullied end up attacking first. And while they're attacking, Jaime notices that the huge horde of Dothraki and Daenerys' dragon flying in closer to him. So Jaime ends up sending his men from the south side straight in to run at the Dothraki and fight them in open field, because he wants to create as much distance between Daenerys' army and himself and his resources as much as possible. And while some of Jaime's men are south, fighting the Dothraki, Jaime and Bronn are actually fighting the Unsullied on the north side. But then we're going to get Daenerys' point of view, and she's going to be flying Drogon through the fight, and she's going to be picking carriages and setting them on fire. And it is here where we're going to notice that Daenerys is going to have a very targeted attack. She's burning some Lannister men who are surrounding the carriages, but other than that, they are very targeted attacks on the resources. And while she's taking out all of the resources, she has the Dothraki clearing out the Lannister forces in open field combat. And this is positive because all of the flames are under control, and that her own men are not getting harmed by her actions. But then we're going to get a look at the ground level, and this is where the Lannister soldiers and Jaime are freaking out. And Jaime tells them just to focus on fighting the Unsullied from the north to free up some space, because right now they are trapped between two sides of a war. They want to try and defeat the Unsullied to create some room. Jaime's military plan has pretty much been thrown out of the window since the dragon has been introduced. Jaime has no idea how to handle this threat, so he's trying to free up as much space as possible. So we're going to see Jaime and Bronn fighting against the Unsullied, while the Dothraki are coming from the south and slowly getting closer to their position. And then we're going to see the Lannister forces really dominating the Unsullied. And Daenerys will notice this and end up landing right in the middle between the south and the north side, right where the Lannister forces are. And she's going to be attacking them with Drogon. So we're going to see Jaime and Bronn stuck between Drogon and the Unsullied, and they're going to be fighting their way through the Unsullied to try and get away from Drogon. But then we're going to notice Grey Worm, and Grey Worm's going to appear and start attacking Bronn. And Grey Worm is pretty much going to have the upper hand, and Jaime's going to be stuck fighting another Unsullied. But then as Jaime's fighting an Unsullied, he notices that Bronn is getting attacked. So Jaime ends up killing the Unsullied that he's fighting and goes to help out Bronn. Bronn is almost killed by Grey Worm, but then Jaime comes and saves him by stabbing Grey Worm in the back and throwing him to the ground, and then stabbing him multiple times, which ends up killing him. And it is at this moment where we see Daenerys staring into Grey Worm's eyes as he dies. And then she looks at Jaime, and then there's pause. We're going to see Jaime and Daenerys stare at each other for a moment. We're going to see Daenerys start to tear up, and she's going to run at Jaime with Drogon, because she is absolutely furious. Jaime and Bronn will end up splitting up because Drogon is chasing them. And Drogon is going to go for a bite to kill Jaime, but Jaime ends up dodging it out of the way. But then Drogon ends up flying in the sky. We're going to see Daenerys flying away from the fight, and she's really tearing up and getting emotional, but then we see her face turn into anger. From Jaime's point of view, he's very confused because he almost died and now Daenerys is flying away. But then he starts to see the dragon turn around. Jaime's kind of confused, but then he sees the dragon coming right towards them. And this is where Jaime gets panicked and he starts running as fast as he can, yelling at all of his men to take cover. And as he's warning everybody, Jaime's making a bolt towards the river. And he's calling Bronn's name and looking for him, trying to save him. And while Daenerys is flying towards the forces, she starts screaming Dracarys. And then Drogon starts burning all of the Lannister forces. She pretty much is conducting a napalm strike on all of the Lannister men, and she's closing in on Jaime. And Jaime gets caught by some Unsullied and he's getting attacked. And just before the fire gets to Jaime, Bronn comes out of nowhere, grabs Jaime and throws him into the river. So then we're going to get another scene with Daenerys and she is furious. And we're going to see her burn tons of Lannister forces, pretty much recreating the Field of Fire. We're going to see her flying through the sky, burning everyone in her path. And her anger makes her kind of careless because she ends up burning some of her own people. But then we're going to see Jaime and Bronn finally get out of the river. And it's going to look like a totally different landscape than when Jaime first jumped in the water. It won't even be recognizable. Everything will be burned and set on fire. Jaime's going to watch some of his men screaming in pain as they're all set on fire. And there are remnants of his men sprinkled around, and they're being led by Dickon and Randyll Tarly. And they're fending off the Dothraki that are coming towards them. And Jaime's furious, and he tells Bronn to help them out. And Jaime ends up grabbing a spear from a dead Unsullied and hopping on a horse and starts riding along the river. Daenerys is on the ground attacking his men, and Jaime is running along the river with his spear. Daenerys actually notices him coming in, but before she says Dracarys, Jaime throws the spear, and he ends up just missing Daenerys. But because he missed, he had to dive back off the horse into the water to avoid Drogon's fire. And then out of rage, Daenerys sets the whole river on fire to try and bury Jaime under it. But then she takes off and she heads for Bronn, Randyll, and Dickon Tarly. Bronn notices that she's actually coming for them, so he sneaks off, jumps in the water, and tries to swim underwater to get closer to Jaime. Daenerys ends up surrounding Randyll and Dickon and other Lannister followers and has them surrender. Bronn swims away and ends up meeting up with Jaime, and they manage to sneak away while Daenerys deals with the rest of the Lannister supporters. But the next time we see Daenerys, the war is over and it's nighttime, and all of the lords of Westeros who supported Cersei, including Dickon and Randyll Tarly, are captured. She has them chained to sticks and has them ready for execution, and she tells them that they could have joined her in her new world, but instead they chose this path. And she asks if they are ready to die in their old world. Randyll ends up speaking up and he tells her that she isn't worthy to be queen, just because she has a dragon that spits fire. But then Daenerys looks at him and she says that she is the fire. And then Drogon ends up burning all of the Lannister supporters. And Daenerys is going to stand really close to Randyll and watch him burn. And she's going to be in the flames also. And he's going to look kind of startled, but she's going to burn in the flames with Randyll. But then in episode 5, Daenerys comes back to Dragonstone and she tells Missandei, Varys, Tyrion, and Melisandre that Grey Worm died fighting. And Daenerys immediately hugs Missandei and consoles her, and they kind of share a touching scene, kind of mourning Grey Worm. But then Daenerys talks to Tyrion and she tells him about the battle and the death of Grey Worm. And she tells him that she wants no more bloodshed and that she plans on just going to King's Landing and taking Drogon and just ending it. But Tyrion dissuades Daenerys from attacking King's Landing directly because of his fear of killing a ton of civilians. He tells her that they won't want to follow her if she is reckless, and her storming King's Landing doesn't serve their best interests. And then Tyrion tells her that Quono came to him and he was angry because he feels like he doesn't have Daenerys' support because she killed some of his people. And Tyrion tells her that he dealt with Quono, but he gives her a piece of advice and says that her dragons can only be used to aid the war, but not win the war. They have too much riding on it and they can lose all the support that they have. So then Daenerys asks Tyrion what they should do next, and he tells her that he's just working on it. So then Daenerys goes down to the beach to clear her head, and her dragons come to her. And she ends up just kind of petting them and spending time with them, and then Jon shows up. And he apologizes for her loss, and he expresses that he doesn't want any more pointless bloodshed. So then he encourages her to help stop the bloodshed and help him fight this looming threat. And Jon tells her of his idea to capture a white and rally all of the forces to her side to try and fight the dead. While Jon is talking, Rhaegal is fixated on Jon. And Daenerys does understand Jon's point of view, especially because of the loss of Grey Worm, but then she tells Jon that she's never seen Rhaegal or any of her dragons be so fixated on anyone other than herself. And while she's petting Rhaegal, she encourages Jon to come and do the same. So then this scene is going to end with Jon and Daenerys bonding and petting her dragons. But then later in the episode, Jorah will arrive at Dragonstone and he's cured of grayscale. And he's going to meet everyone in the castle. And Daenerys immediately tells him that Grey Worm died, and she's getting really tearful, and she ends up giving Jorah a hug. She tells him that she knew that he would cure his grayscale, and she tells him that he belongs by her side. But Jorah does say that he has something for Jon, and he gives him a letter that is from Sam. And it reads how to reforge and forge Valyrian steel from dragonglass. And it also contains the most important facts from his studies about the White Walkers. And the letter overall makes everyone concerned because it makes this issue more real. And Jon starts a conversation about the letter and opens a conversation on what to do next. And it is here where Davos mentions of a bastard boy named Gendry who he met in this castle. He tells the story of how this child was a Baratheon bastard and how he rescued him from Melisandre. And because he believed Melisandre would kill him, he sent him away to King's Landing. And Davos tells him that he doesn't question the boy's ability to follow the instructions that Sam left, because he was a really talented blacksmith. So Davos volunteers to smuggle Gendry out of King's Landing, and Tyrion decides that he has to go as well, because he heard of the conflict between Jaime, Bronn, and Daenerys, and he wants to go to King's Landing and try and encourage diplomacy between the two sides, and he wants to try and spark a relationship again with Jaime and Bronn, and he wants to ensure their safety before more bloodshed happens. So then Daenerys ends up letting him go out of respect for Tyrion. And Jon also explains that they must go capture a white when they return, and that he's sending out ravens to try and get a team together to sail north to Eastwatch by the Sea. But then we get another scene with Jon and Daenerys, and they're watching Davos and Tyrion leave for King's Landing. And this is just going to be an emotional scene where they're talking about their families and their fathers and their upbringing. But then they wait a couple of days for their return. Then we see Davos, Tyrion, and Gendry arrive on the shore of Dragonstone. And Jon tells them that they are leaving now for Eastwatch by the Sea to capture a white. So then Dany sees them off as they leave to capture a white. There's Jon, Jorah, Gendry, Davos, and some Stark soldiers. And she offers to come with her dragons, but then Jon insists that will give away their location and that they'll know that they're coming. Jon tells her that this has to be a secret mission. They end up saying their goodbyes and they leave for Eastwatch by the Sea. But then in episode 6, Daenerys is going to be at Dragonstone, but then randomly Rhaegal starts to freak out and starts flying north. Daenerys doesn't really understand what's going on and she cannot control Rhaegal, so she hops on Drogon and she follows him with Drogon and Viserion. And Rhaegal ends up taking them north of the wall. And when they arrive, Daenerys sees a group of 12 people on a rock in the middle of the lake surrounded by whites. Rhaegal immediately flies straight to Jon Snow in the group of 12 and starts defending them, while Daenerys and Viserion start burning all of the whites that are approaching them. And all of the people surrounded by the whites include Jon, the Hound, Beric Dondarrion, Thoros Emir, Tormund, Gendry, and Jorah. And Daenerys ends up clearing out all of the whites that are approaching the group on Drogon. And then the dragons end up surrounding the group on the rock, fending off all of the whites that are approaching them. And then the group start boarding the dragons. And Jon, Tormund, and Gendry end up wrestling a white together and getting it on Rhaegal. Tormund and Gendry also get on Rhaegal, and then Jon sends him away to Eastwatch to safety. And then Jon and Beric jump on Viserion, but then Viserion gets overtaken by whites, and it ends up getting knocked over and killed. Beric ends up jumping off Viserion back onto the rock platform. He's able to get back on Drogon. Jon isn't so lucky. He falls off the platform and gets kind of surrounded by whites, but then he ends up getting rescued by Benjen. But then Drogon ends up getting hit and attacked, and then Daenerys has to leave Jon behind. So she flies away, but on her way back to Eastwatch, she notices Rhaegal flying back to Jon. And there's nothing Daenerys can do, so she just flies back to Eastwatch to bring the others to safety. But while they're trying to hold down the white and they're trying to make sure everyone's okay, they see Rhaegal return with an injured Jon Snow. But then when Jon gets back, he immediately apologizes to Daenerys because Viserion has been killed and resurrected as a dead mount for the Night King. And he tells them that they must leave immediately and go to King's Landing and try and rally support from everyone in Westeros. Then the last episode, the group will get to Dragonstone, and they're going to drop off Gendry to start forging Valyrian steel. But then the rest of the group is going to leave for King's Landing, and that includes Daenerys, Jon, Tyrion, Davos, Missandei, the Hound, Theon, Varys, Jorah, and Quono. And they're going to go to the Dragon Pit, and this is going to be a meeting between all of the main characters of Game of Thrones. This includes Cersei, Daenerys, Jon Snow, Tyrion, Jaime, Davos, Missandei, the Hound, Theon, Brienne, Varys, Bronn, Jorah, Euron, Qyburn, the Mountain, Quono, and Podrick. And this scene is going to feature a ton of interactions between different characters. We're going to see the Hound bring in the white, and it's going to be in a crate. And Daenerys is going to tell them that she doesn't want any more bloodshed because they need to band together to defeat the White Walkers. And Jaime asks her how they can move forward because they're very bitter towards each other because Jaime watched Daenerys murder hundreds and hundreds of his men. And Jaime tells her that he still hears the screams of all of his men burning alive. But Daenerys lashes back and says that she's lost men too. She's thinking of Grey Worm. Jon interrupts and says that they must move forward, and he has the Hound open the crate to allow the White out. And the Hound starts attacking it, he can't kill it, and then Cersei orders the Mountain to try. And the Mountain isn't successful either, so Jon ends up killing it with Dragonglass. So then Daenerys lays down her terms. She says that Cersei will surrender and help with the White Walker threat. Daenerys tells her that she will be given Casterly Rock to live and rule out her days with her brother. And she says if Cersei doesn't surrender, then she will take up her dragons to the Red Keep and finish the war for good. And Cersei tells her that she needs to contemplate these terms, and she tells Daenerys that she hopes in good faith that she understands. So then, the group leaves for Winterfell to prepare for the White Walker threat, and that includes Daenerys, Jon Snow, Tyrion, Davos, Missandei, the Hound, Theon, Brienne, Varys, Jorah, Quono, and Podrick. And we finish off the season with this group heading north to Winterfell. And it is possible here that at some point, Daenerys and Jon could have some sexy time. I'm not sure. We will see. But that is it for my predictions, everybody. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I got a lot more predictions coming out of the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you guys later.